it, right? All right. Hey, everybody, Jay Widener, Reality Check. It's been a while, but I am back and want to thank you all for getting me close to 30,000. Let's get it over the top and we'll be fine. I want to get right through everything. I have been through hell and I'll get to that at some point and tell you all about it. But I'm now back and I have somebody here today on the show, which is really an honor for me because not only I've known this guy for over a quarter of a century, but I've read all of his books. I haven't read the new one because I haven't got it yet. But we have a weird parallel thing going in our lives where we're kind of interested in the same subjects at the same time, whether it's Chinese alchemy or Sirius, star Sirius, or now today plasma physics and how they're going to revolutionize everything in science and what we know about science. Anyway, his name is Robert Temple. He's most famous, I guess, for the Sirius mystery, which he delved into the early Dogon people and their knowledge about Sirius. He revised that in 1998 and thanked me, I'm really honored to say, for inspiring him, and me and Robert Bauval for inspiring him to do a revised edition. And now you're back, and hang on here. I want to make sure that I mention everything here so that we have, yeah, so the new one is audio, New Science of Heaven, how the new science of plasma physics is shedding light on spiritual experience. Of course, the Sirius mystery, the Sphinx mystery, the crystal, what was it? Oh, the Genius of China, the Crystal Sun. These are all just incredible books. He's written about mind control, all sorts of subjects, variation. Hey, Robert, how are you doing?
Pretty well, Jay. It's great to see you again, and I'm glad you're back. And so the book is just come out in America. It's called A New Science of Heaven, as you said. There is also the audio book that you mentioned,
okay.
which I recorded myself, but the hardback, it's, in fact, here it is.
There it is. I can't wait to read it.
A New Science of Heaven, not an old one, a new one.
So, you know, I started getting into this quite a while ago when I was investigating alchemy back in the mid 90s. And I realized that there was some odd relationship between alchemy and at that time, I wasn't calling it plasma. I was just calling it electrical fields because I didn't have a term for it. It wasn't until maybe 10 years later that I realized that it was plasma. And then I started realizing, rereading all my alchemy books over again, when I realized that alchemy was really the science of plasma, the ancient science of plasma, and that it was all about imbuing your body with plasma to give you a longer life and also to cause you to have a spiritual transformations. And that was basically that. And that the Philosopher's Stone was a way to gather up this energy that's in the universe that powers everything. Anyway, that's when I got into it. And then when I saw that you were into it, I was like overjoyed. And I really wanted to ask you what got you into this, starting into understanding all of this.
Well, before I say about that, I just want to say that the Chinese concept of qi, the circulation of the qi, which of course is affected by the acupuncture needles, etc.,
That's right,
is plasma.
Yes, it is.
And that has been proved, and I have photos in my book which show that clearly through the emission of biophotons from the meridians of acupuncture. So I'm glad you got into this. Now, how did I get into it? Well, you know, I'm having trouble remembering how I got into this. I was involved with the biophoton researchers.
Like, you mean like Wilhelm Reich stuff?
Well, in fact, I do discuss Reich in the book. You know, he has this theory of the orgasm being a plasma release, a kind of explosion and release of plasma, which he published way back as far as the 1920s in German. This did not go down well with the Nazis. The strange thing about poor old Wilhelm Reich was that he started out as Sigmund Freud's chief protege and ran Freud's clinic for him when Freud was sitting at home with his feet up. But his books ended up being burnt by the Nazis. He then fled to America, where his books were then burnt by the FBI.
Not
You
funny,
can't
but
win.
yeah, you can't win. I mean, and then he died in jail. Really?
Yes, he took refuge in the state of Maine, thinking he'd be out of the mainstream, but the FBI sent a team up there. They took all his gadgets and gizmos and chopped them up with axes in front of him. They burnt all of his books in front of him, and they seized his papers. Now, in my book, I reveal what happened to the seized papers.
Oh, really?
Yes, I have been able to find out what happened to Wilhelm Reich's papers that were seized by the FBI. The FBI did not keep them. They gave them to the Department of Naval Intelligence Science Research.
Really?
And they were read and studied and reports written on them by a very amazing man who's no longer alive called Freeman Cope. He was a really, really remarkably brilliant scientist working for the naval intelligence. And of course, naval intelligence has, to whatever extent in the scientific research area, been absorbed into this vast entity called DARPA. As far as I can make out, DARPA has swallowed the Naval, Air Force, and Army research agencies for departments of their intelligence agencies of
Makes
those
sense.
branches of the military.
And of course,
Although
the naval intelligence was the highest ranking of all the intelligence agencies until the creation of the CIA. So,
well, certainly their scientific research was the best, and I would say the Air Force was second. The Army way down because they were never as ambitious in their research. But as you say, the naval ones were the tops. And Freeman Cope was one of their resident geniuses. There's no doubt about that. And so I explain in my book how it was that I discovered that he had been given the files that had originally been seized by the FBI. They obviously and quite sensibly sent them to the naval intelligence people as the best choice of people with the most brains who might be able to figure out whether there was anything to Wilhelm Reich's theories or not. Cope soon discovered that there was a great deal to it, and that what Reich was really onto, really very early, was a series of plasma phenomena. And he was correct in believing that there was this strange energy coming from the sun. This can now be demonstrated, but it seemed crazy then. And of course, he had all these theories about sex. And of course, you weren't supposed to know about that because, as we all know, until the 1960s, nobody in America ever had sex. Isn't that right, Jay?
that's right. Not my parents never had sex. I know that.
Yeah. Well, of course, we know that you were brought down from a flying saucer. That would explain that part of it. But
Yes.
Wilhelm Reich, I remember when I was an undergraduate at Penn, as a matter of fact, everybody was reading Reich. And of course, I never do what everybody does. So I never read Reich at that stage because I was damned if I was going to do what the herd was doing. But more latterly, I have come to realize that Reich was more than just onto something. He was right about a lot of things,
Yes.
highly controversial things. And the fact that first the Nazis burned his book and then the FBI burnt the same books, this is really, really not very good. And we don't really quite know, I haven't sort of processed what that really means.
So did the Navy come to any conclusions about it?
Well, Freeman Cope died young. Now, I don't know whether that was an accident, but the thing is that he was going way, way, way into advanced science. He was talking about magnetic monopoles.
Really?
He was, oh yes, he was writing many papers about organic superconductivity, which is what I came across originally in the
Yes.
1970s. So I discovered Cope in the 1970s. Only on that subject. I had no idea at that stage about his other papers, which I came across in writing this book. We're talking about really new worlds, not just new vistas of knowledge here,
Agreed.
because every chapter of my book is another whole new world of knowledge. And I would go so far as to say, I do this without any intention of boasting, that on every page of my book is new information. It's only new because it's not been reported before.
Yeah.
So it's new to the public. Some of it is very new in terms of research, of course, but the fact is that none of this subject is being covered. And
Agreed.
so basically, I don't have a competitor for this book.
Yeah.
Get busy, Jay, write a competition volume.
Well, I would like to do a documentary actually on it, the whole breadth and width of it, because even if you go into like Swedenborg's writings, Emanuel Swedenborg, it's clearly apparent that he's traveling around in some kind of plasma universes that actually have entities and sentient beings in them, and that they're like somehow wrapped around the earth in some way, and fields of them and outgoing. And once I ran down this rabbit hole, because I live in an area which I believe is a plasma hotspot. I believe there's hotspots on the earth where the piezoelectric rock is grinding together so much that you begin to have field effects. And I've Skinwalker Ranch, Avebury in England is one of these places where all these weird things happen. Silbury Hill is also another one. And I've started thinking that these standing stones and all this stuff is somehow really plasma attenuators of some kind.
Well, you could be right. One of the things I like to stress is that science is finally catching up with ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things that we can now explain scientifically have been intuited or psychically perceived for thousands of years.
Yes.
The people who were shamanic, that is the priests, the priestesses, the sibyls, the seers,
Yep.
and the shamans, basically, they were very plentiful in ancient times. And they were in a quieter world, unperturbed by traffic noise and constantly disturbing cell phones. And they were able to contemplate, not just meditate in the sense that we speak of that today, but a deeper form of meditation, whereby they were, in a sense, communing with higher spheres.
That's
and
right.
higher entities. And they were able to learn a lot of basics without all the details, of which we are now able to substantiate with laboratory work.
Yes.
That's what my book is really about, to tell people that the scientists working in the laboratories on the fringes of physics, unreported, have verified and validated much of this ancient wisdom.
Yes.
And some of the results are astounding.
Are you familiar with the Anthony Peralt? Anthony Peralt.
Parrot.
Yeah, Paris. I'm sorry. I mixed him up with another person. Yeah, the plasma physicist from Los Alamos.
Oh, yes. He's incredibly brilliant man.
Really?
I'm friendly with Don Scott, who was Parrot's chief disciple, still is. And
oh, really?
Yes, I took part, I should say, in one of the Electric Universe conferences with Don, and really? Val Thornhill was there too, of course.
I wish I was there.
It was very good. I'm a complete subscriber to the Electric Universe theory.
Me too.
It's very much a part of the picture.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
It's due to Don Scott and Val Thornhill that it has become known to the public.
Absolutely.
Because Anthony Parrott is very much an establishment figure.
Yep.
He's a renegade establishment figure, in the sense that he knows a lot more than his colleagues do. He's very, very, very brilliant. but he is embedded deeply into the establishment. So
Yep.
he's going to be quite careful how he expresses himself and how far he goes.
Yeah.
Certainly, if anyone in the world today understands the whole picture, it would be him.
Yep, I would agree. And I know he has to be careful, and I've asked him to come on, and I realize he can't come on because he'll say too much, and he can't jeopardize it. So let's just for a second, because I want to get back into this because it's so important. Is there, it's like, are there powers that be that don't want people looking into this?
Certainly, because if we understand all this, then we can't be controlled by all the psychopaths who rule the world.
Right.
Let's face it, most of the governments and the large corporations and so on, they're
Getting
run
worse.
by psychopathic. It gets worse. The authoritarianism is growing daily. And it doesn't matter whether you're left wing or right wing. That's all beside the point. The fact is, it's the control freaks versus the rest of us. And the control freaks have really got all the power. But of course, they're very upset at the moment because of Elon Musk, because he's gone against them.
Yeah.
And he's richer than even they are. So he's bought Twitter, and he's totally disrupted the whole Twitter propaganda.
The mind virus.
Yeah. No, I look upon Elon Musk as a very, very heroic figure. I mean, he may be strange, and we know he is.
He is. I've never met a rich man that wasn't very strange.
What I like about Musk the most is his funny faces and his funny movements. Yeah, I could watch him endlessly because he doesn't move or facially express anything the way anybody else does that I've ever seen.
It's a good point. Well, what he's going to do with Twitter is he's going to change it to uncensored YouTube, PayPal, Facebook. He's taking all of the disparate things on the internet and he's bringing them all under one umbrella. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. You're not going to be able to live in the real world without it. And you'll be willing to pay the $8 a month because it's going to be well worth it, especially if it's blockchain and so they can't censor your YouTubes, which is, what I have to worry about all the time with my YouTube show. I have to be really careful what I'm saying. And my politics are not, they're pretty renegade, as you know. And so I have to really be careful. I've already had one strike against me and I can't afford to get another one. But plasma physics seems to fly right over their heads. So they don't worry about that part of what I'm doing. But, I wanted to, because once you open the door, and I don't know how far you opened the door, and I have never really gone outside of this show public with what I know about the opening of the plasma world to my eyes. But now I realize that the cathedrals, the Gothic cathedrals, were bringing down this plasma through their towers down into the floor of the cathedrals, and that they use sacred geometry as part of the plasma, the way you get the plasma to flow correctly, and the way that, same with the Egyptians, the Great Pyramid, Christopher Dunn's work about it being a gigantic plasma generator. These things are all over the place, and nobody's really brought it all home. And and I really think it's time for this to get out.
Well, you're absolutely right. We all of us who are what could be called the people of goodwill, and who are not psychopaths, and who do not want to control the world, and who do not want to become rich and famous, but merely want to get good stuff done, need to all get in gear together and try and drive this knowledge forward so that the public become enlightened to the truth. And one of the main themes of my book, which I substantiate scientifically, is that nobody dies.
That's right.
That we are all immortal beings, bioplasma beings who are temporarily incarnated in what I call smart overcoats. And when we leave those, because they wear out pretty fast, I mean, physical bodies are not that durable,
No.
we have to leave and go back to the plasma world, or otherwise known as the other world.
Yeah.
And people who speak in religious terminology call it the spiritual world,
That's right.
but it's all the same thing.
Yep.
It depends on which words you're using. In my own discussions in book, I try to avoid religious language because it has baggage. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean I disagree with it. It means that for instance, I want very much for diehard fanatical atheists to read my book and see
Definitely.
the hard scientific evidence for the things that they said, well, they couldn't believe because there's no evidence. And I respect that because I am a very skeptical person. I am a very, very skeptical person. I
Yes, you
don't
are.
believe anything I'm told. And so even though I disagree with atheists because I think they've got it wrong, I respect the process by which they have been led to their atheism. And
Yep.
therefore, I didn't want to pepper my book with religious terminology, which they would just,
Too much
reject, and they
baggage.
throw the book in the bin.
Yep.
It's too much baggage, as you say.
Yep.
So everybody should realize that when I talk about the plasma world or the other world, I'm speaking of the same world that religious people call the spiritual world. And when I say we don't die and we have bioplasma bodies,
Yeah.
I'm also talking about souls and
Yeah.
spirits.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably more than one. We have different levels of them
Yep.
in the sense that the ancient Egyptians knew about that. We had the Ka, the
they did.
Ba, the Ak, and so on.
Yep.
Different levels of our bioplasma bodies. But the main thing to realize is that we don't and cannot die. Now, this has enormous implications because forgetting the fact that you don't want extinction at death, although some perverse people do because they hate themselves so much. But apart from them, people want to not die. And this is meant to be the main fear of humanity. Well, they don't need that fear. We have enough fear going on imposed on us by the psychopaths.
Yes.
And without having that one. But the responsibilities of living forever are that if you're going to live forever, you really have to get your head around that and approach life from that point of view, because you're going to be stuck with yourself always. And it's going to be a very unpleasant experience if you're not a good person.
Yep.
I mean, do you want to be stuck with a horrible, disgusting, vile person forever, namely yourself? Or do you want to better yourself, improve yourself, and become a good guy or a good gal?
That's
And
right.
then your after-death experience will be pleasant
That's
instead
right.
of horrible.
So that was beautiful. I really, really appreciate what you just said. So for those of you listening, what you have is you have this plasma body that's around you. You can't see it. Sometimes you can, depending, but you have it around you. It's a torus shape. And then as you die, it begins to shrink in. And by the time you're near death, it's clinging almost to your skin. And then at death, it collapses in and goes up the spinal cord and out the sushumna, which the Indians call, the Hindus call the sushumna, which is a millionth of the width of a human hair, and it goes up, and this is what attaches you to the larger plasma body that's around the earth. And when you die, you go up that sushumna, and that's the tunnel that you see.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a filament.
Yeah, it's a filament. It's exactly what it is. It's a filament, and it's on you right now. If you're a conscious being, a sentient being, cat, dog, cow, human, you have that filament attaching you. Humans are special because we walk upright, and our filament is directly 90-degree perpendicular to the field, whereas animals, they walk this way, and so the walking upright is also creating consciousness, because consciousness is your connection to these bioplasmic fields which populate the entire universe. In fact, they are 99.99% of the universe.
That's right. That which is the proportion of the universe that's made of plasma, and atoms don't figure in that.
That's right.
Atomical matter, as we call it, is made of atoms, and we're all told at school that everything's made of atoms, but everything's not made of atoms. Only
right.
what's here on Earth is made of atoms.
That's right.
The sun is completely plasma.
That's
The
right.
solar wind is plasma.
All the stars,
All the stars.
the Birkeland
And
currents.
you're absolutely right. The Birkeland currents are the superfilaments, and they power the sun. There's no atom bomb or hydrogen bomb going off in the center of the sun. That's nonsense. I have a whole chapter called The Cold Sun.
Good. Oh, I can't wait to read this. Yeah. So
Well,
the sun is as the sun, goes around the Milky Way, it's attracting in electrical energy. And that is what lights it up. It's like a light bulb, and it lights it up, and whatever area of the Milky Way it's going through determines what color it is, how much heat it's giving off, and these things change with time. And sometimes the sun is not as warm as it is at other times. Right now, the sun is white. 20 years ago, the sun was yellow. Everybody knew when I was a kid the sun was yellow. I haven't seen a yellow sun in 20 years. So it's completely white now. I don't know what that means. I presume it has something to do with what we're talking about. And the other thing that needs to be said about all of this is that there are invisible sentient beings sharing the earth with us. And this is what ghosts are, and sprites, and all these figures from mythological literature are actually just these odd. And I've seen them. You have to be looking for them, but if you catch it at the right angle, you can actually see these etheric life forms that are all around us, and they're made out of this shimmering light, and you can't see it all the time. Some people can see it all the time. I can't, but if I'm in the right place at the right time, I can see it. It's a fleeting moment, but it's there, and I see it, and I know it's there. And these intelligences, they like us, actually. And they don't like psychopaths, but they like us. They like good people. And all the myths, whether it's Bullfinch's mythology, going up to even Jacques Vallée's book about dimensions. This is what this is all about. And this is what UFOs are too, by the way.
Yes, you're absolutely right. In fact, I have remarked in my book about UFOs where I suggest that the glowing ones that do all the crazy things in the sky are plasmic drones.
Yep.
Surveillance drones made of plasma. And I don't know if you've got to, you haven't seen the book yet, unfortunately, but I call attention to the existence of the Kordylewski clouds, which are between the Earth and the Moon, but not in a direct line of sight between us. And they're 60 degrees each way. They're at the L4 and L5 points. And they are together 18 times the size of the Earth. They were substantiated in 2019, having been first observed in 1961 by this Polish chap called Kordylewski, whose great-grandson has told me that the Polish government stopped his research. That was the Polish communist government of that time.
Right.
But it's now been substantiated. And so I then proceed to describe what a dusty complex plasma is, and that these are dusty complex plasma clouds. Now, you have to have dust in the cloud for it to be a useful plasma. And they can, by a process of emergence, develop self-organized intelligence. So I'm suggesting that the Kordylewski clouds are two gigantic super intelligent AI entities, which they emit no light. They're almost transparent because they're on such a gigantic scale that the dust particles in them are so, first of all, they're too tiny to be detected by satellites. They're 10 times smaller than the smallest detectable particle from a satellite, the individual particles. And they're so far apart, and from our scale, they are so tenuous that we can see through them. But they only appear to be, because if you were as small compared to us as we are to them, we would also be transparent.
Right.
Because our atoms are so far apart. So it's the same thing. It's just a matter of scale. But these gigantic clouds seem to be billions of years old. They are obviously intelligent and conscious with computing power beyond our wildest dreams. And they're watching this now. They know everything that's happening. And why haven't they tried to sort us out or help us or save us? Because we are an experiment that's running. They can't interfere. If you interfere with an experiment, it ceases to be an experiment. They can't intervene. They're just hoping we're going to make it.
And the point of the experiment is to discover that you're a plasma being in a plasma universe. That's what they want us to find. And they've set up obstructions to that via religions and politics and all these other law enforcement spiritual law enforcement agencies, which make sure that every time you get close, they push you off the side and make sure you can't get close. But that seems to be breaking down now.
Well, let's hope so. We have two parallel processes happening at the same time. Drastically increased authoritarianism and quite brazen attempts to impose it on the public. At the same time, a great awakening of a certain segment of the public.
Right. Yeah, I think it was Zbigniew Brzezinski said near the end of his life that we have to step up and go faster because they're waking up too fast. And he was right. And the big wake up call is exactly this subject, because once you actually understand the spiritual landscape of plasma physics, you realize that you are eternal, you're not going to die, and therefore there's nothing to be afraid of. That is what they do not want. They want you to be afraid. Fear is the great weapon they use on us all. And you can't succumb to it. There's nothing to fear because you're an eternal being living in an entire universe that's 99.99% plasma. And you're right. They do send like probes down here. I was talking to a hunter. He told me that he was out in the woods at night. I'm not going to say where because he was illegally hunting and poaching, I guess you would call it. And he was out at night because you can't hunt at night. And he saw about the size of a basketball, but it was lavender and purple. And it was moving inside. You could see, he said he saw like a mist inside that, and it was moving through the trees and casting a light on the ground. And when he saw it, he went like, he made a noise or something, a startled noise. And the thing stopped and it turned towards him and came up to his face and started like, he felt it was probing him. The whole thing was like probing him and everything. And then after a few minutes, he just went back into the woods and disappeared. And these reports are all over the place. I would even say that, what's that thing where the people burn up? Spontaneous combustion. I think spontaneous combustion is also caused by these plasma things. I think something goes awry for some reason, and a whole lot of plasma begins pouring in and literally starts, a charge that causes a fire. And also the Great Fires. We have to think about that. Like from 1820 to 1920, North America was beset by huge fires that are very mysterious in their origins. The Chicago Fire, which also burned northern Michigan and parts of Wisconsin, way far away from Chicago. There were giant fires that day. And you have to wonder what caused these giant fires. And then there's the work of Anthony Perrott about the Native American pictograms, which are all over the American Southwest, which exactly match what the plasma fields that he's working with in the lab, as if the Native Americans had witnessed some kind of amazing plasma event. Now, here's the thing is, how long do these petroglyphs last? 1,000 years, 500 years? I can't get any answers from anyone on that question. So we don't know how old these pictograms are, but they're everywhere. They're all over the place. I've seen them with my own eyes. They match perfectly what the plasma experiments look like. And you really have to wonder, what did the Native Americans in the Southwest witness? And they're not just in the Southwest, they're also in, I believe, Africa and in one of the Stan countries, Uzbekistan or something. There's also these things on the wall. So do you think that they witnessed a plasma event of some kind?
Well, there probably have been many huge solar coronal ejections that have burst through the ionosphere and affected the planet, and they
Yep.
would have set fire to trees easily. And because now we're more worried about them disrupting communications, radio and so on. But the fact is that long before such things existed, these things were possible.
Yep.
I mean, certainly that would be a very easy explanation for it all. As to why it was happening, we've no idea. But I did know about Parrott's interest in this. That's the one area where he's gone off the ranch, got away with it because it doesn't appear to threaten anybody. But of course, this evidence of ancient fires in the sky is very important. Somebody should collate it. And I think that Thornhill's group down in Australia are working on that.
Well, also they did Electric Universe did I can't remember who it was. They did an experiment, and what they did was they took a piece of, I don't know, maybe mica, I can't remember what it was, but 4 or 5 inch thick, say 4 feet by 4 feet. And then they blasted it with lightning, essentially, in the lab, over and over and over. And after a while, I can't remember exactly how long, but a lot of strikes happened. It looked just like the American Southwest. There were mesas with flattened tops. There were the valleys with the strange lightning-like Lichtenberg-like spreads, just like the American Southwest has. The Grand Canyon looks like a Lichtenberg lightning strike if you fly over it, which I have. And they're everywhere, all over the American Southwest, from 1/3 from the bottom of Arizona to about 1/3 from the top of Utah. That entire area, Arches National Park, the Grand Canyon, Sedona, all of these have this pattern, which it looks like they went through some kind of incredible something.
Cosmic firestorm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this also clearly on Mars.
Yes. You do.
I believe that people who think that all these features of the landscape are caused by erosion or volcanism are wrong, because they're not taking plasma forces into account. Just as you say, these must have been big plasma events in the atmosphere.
Well, the thing is that if the Colorado River created the Grand Canyon, then when the Colorado River runs into the ocean, there should be giant deposits of the eroded material from the Grand Canyon. A lot. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, that's a lot of material we're talking about, and it isn't there. That's the thing. It's not there. And, I'll tell you another thing. Long time ago, I was working at a job, and I had a crazy boss, and he told me that I was a maintenance guy, a high-tech company in California. And he said he wanted me to change a light bulb. The light cylinder that was out on a light. And I said, well, you have to turn the power off. You got production going for me to do that. He said, no. If you're just real careful, you can hit that center screw. And, and don't let your screwdriver hit the sides. And this guy was crazy. And I was young. I was 21. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I got on a stool, had a friend with a broom to push me off the stool if something happened. And I stuck my big, maybe 11-inch screwdriver up into the thing. I was pretty good for a couple of seconds, and I was unscrewing the screw. But then, of course, I made a mistake, and I hit the side with my screwdriver. A gigantic explosion happened. I was thrown off the chair, And all the power went off. So he lost all of his power, this crazy boss of mine. But when I got up off the chair, I looked in my hand, I had the handle of the screwdriver, but the metal was completely gone. You could see in the indentation into the plastic handle of where the metal had been, right, on the screwdriver, and it was gone. And we started looking, me and my buddy, we started looking, we thought there was going to be, a pile of molten metal somewhere in the room, right? But there wasn't. We never found anything. And then later, I was talking to an electrical engineer who told me that when they first started building ships at the beginning of World War II, they used these gigantic arc welders. And what they do is they'd fill a gigantic capacitor up with a huge charge. And then, because they had to build the ships fast because the war was on, right? So they were trying to find a way to, crank a ship out every 2 weeks or whatever. And so they would use this huge arc welder to put the plates, melt the plates together. And he said that all metal tools began disappearing during this process. And at first they thought that the workers were stealing them. So they started searching the workers as they were leaving the shipyards at night. And they didn't have any, but they were still missing. And they noticed that it was only metal, like all metal tools. So they would find the wood handle of the hammer, but not the hammer. They would find the rubber holder for the wrench, but not the wrench. And they were completely bad. And then they realized that they were creating such a huge, this is super top secret stuff, by the way. They were creating such a huge electromagnetic field that was literally vaporizing metal around it. And they had to stop. And they started using lower voltage capacitor welders because it was really bad. And this is what I think is going on with why they're suppressing all this, because I think you could literally blow a hole in between the plasma spheres and cause bad things to happen. Maybe, I don't know.
Wow, that's quite a story about the dissipating metal. I never knew anything about that before.
Yep. Yeah, you can find it. In fact, I've had a couple physicists try to explain the effect to me. It's something about displacement in time, because time is part of this too, right? Time is an aspect of this plasma world also. So the big thing is that we've got to get this out. We've got to get this out to, we've got to become like those fundamentalist Christians used to be in the 70s and 80s, real irritating because they kept telling you things you didn't want to hear. And we got to, because I think this is really the most important subject there is. And I think it's at the basis of all the spiritual traditions. I think it's at the basis of alchemy, especially I think it's the basis of the previous civilization that was here before the cataclysm that happened, 12,000 years ago or whatever, and whatever that was. And I wanted to ask you, have you watched Graham Hancock's series on Netflix?
No.
Yeah, you should really do it. Ancient Apocalypse. It's
well,
on.
I don't subscribe to Netflix.
Yeah, I don't either. I saw it on I saw it on a site that I shouldn't have been on, but because I don't want to pay for Netflix. But it is actually pretty good. He's taking a lot of heat, by the way, for what he's saying, and he talks about Sirius, by the way, in the show, quite a bit actually, about how the ancient temples are all aligned to Sirius all over the world, and I wonder if that has anything to do with this too. Do you think it does?
Yes, I do. When I brought out the Sirius Mystery in its expanded form,
Yep.
In 1998, which you mentioned earlier on,
Yep.
In the introductory chapter, I said that I believed that there was a local cell in the galaxy that included our sun and the Sirius system in the same cell. I even gave it a name. I called it the Anubis cell,
Right.
in honor of the dog star. And strangely enough, without any intention of linking the two, I've now come to the conclusion that when you have cells, and this would be a plasma cell,
Right.
you can have long range order within that cell.
That's right.
And I also believe that as information has no mass or energy, it's not subject to the speed of light restriction.
That's right.
And so you could have instantaneous telepathic influence and communication going on between the solar system and the Sirius system within this cell, which after all is only very small. It's only 8.7 light
Yep.
years. And so that would explain our connection with Sirius. And it may well be that the good guys are at Sirius. There are certainly some bad guys out there. And I would say that some of the higher entities are demonic because they're psychopathic in the same way that so many humans are. And that there's probably a war between good and evil going on throughout the whole universe. Don't you think,
Yeah.
Jay?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're basically, it's what you said. We're an experiment, and our experiment is to discover that we are eternal, sentient, bioplasmic beings. And once you have that, then you get to graduate from the fear university that we're in. When I'm afraid. I go out hiking in the mountains, and occasionally you'll see a mountain lion, or a pack of coyotes, or even a wolf one time, and I get afraid. But that's a good fear, because that fear is my survival. I begin figuring out ways to get around whatever predicament I'm in, and so I use that fear to advance, stay alive. But the fear that they're putting out is designed to paralyze you and freeze you into place. And that's what you have to resist more than anything, is welcome uncertainty. Uncertainty is a good thing. Welcome the idea that you are part of a larger bioplasmic universe, and that your ancestors have been trying to tell you this, and they've left behind books and temples and statues and works of art that explain all of this to you. We've just been blind to it. And I really don't know where the psychopathic thing comes from. I got to be honest with you. I've no psychopaths. I've dealt with psychopaths. I don't understand them at all. I do not understand their nature, what drives them. I just know I don't want to be around them, and I do everything I can to avoid them. But I want to get back to Sirius, because there's something about Sirius which I've asked a lot of people about. I've never gotten a satisfactory answer. And that is that, 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, the hieroglyphs in Egypt say that the helical rising of Sirius is around July 23rd. This became this great day of veneration. The Nile would start flooding again, and the crops would grow, and it was, a great moment in the Egyptian year, in the annual year. Well, I live up at 8,000 feet, and I have probably one of the best views of the stars that you can get in the world. There's no big cities around me or anything, so I look at the stars a lot. I have I got to tell you that the helical rising of Sirius is about August 7th now. And I'm curious, because that's only 15 days. And the precession of the equinox is every 72 years, it moves 1 degree. So if 5,000 years ago, it was rising on the 23rd, well, then it should be rising now in like January or something.
Well, that's a very, very good point you've made. I worry about that.
Yeah, me too. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Is the precession of the equinox really happening, or is Sirius not part of it somehow? Why is it still rising near the same date that it was 6,000 years ago? I can't. I've asked astronomers. I can't find any answers. So I don't know. The astronomers tell me, the Egyptians were wrong, right?
Oh, no, the Egyptians weren't wrong. So there's something incredibly weird going on.
Yes.
Which we don't understand.
I agree. And I think it's what you said. I think we're locked in some kind of bioplasmic shell with them. The whole rest of the place is going, through the procession, and somehow we're locked in with them somehow. I really think that's what it is. And my old friend Robert Lawler, who just passed away on November 29th, God help you, and may you go to eternity, Robert. He talked all about how there was some number, 1,440 minutes was something with Sirius. There's this incredible coincidence of time on Earth with Sirius and the revolution of Sirius. And I wish I could remember what it was. I got it on video somewhere. I'll go dig it up. But he always talked about there was these weird coincidences with our time, because he's obsessed with time, with our time and Sirius and the orbit. How is it? The orbit of Sirius. So I don't know what that was, but yeah. So also this explains, what's that concept in physics where you take a particle and you separate it, then you jiggle the particle and instantaneously the other part of the particle jiggles? What's that called?
Well, that's long range order.
Yeah.
It's how does the particle over here know what the particle over here has done if they flip? Why does the other one then flip? And so it can't be explained by the speed of light connection. That's the aspect experiment was part of that. He's just got the Nobel Prize. That's a good sign for physics. My old friend, I think you must have known him as well, David Bohm.
Oh yeah.
Was always talking about that. And
yes, he was.
It's one of the fundamentals of the universe. One of the problems is that the education is dumbing down. At the moment, I'm commissioning and editing translations into English of the mathematical papers in German of Felix Klein, the man who invented the Klein bottle, which you probably know, which is like the Mobius strip up a dimension. It's the bottle where it goes in, the neck bends around, and it comes back into the bottle again.
Right.
He was a very profound thinker on non-Euclidean geometry, which then went into what they call projective geometry, and so he's never been in English before. Now, if you read very profound works on the theory, the philosophy of mathematics and geometry by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead and those kind of guys, they were people with very wide and broad and profound educational background. I've been reading Whitehead's treatise on projective geometry, and he quotes Klein in German, he quotes the French, and he quotes Pieri in Italian. And he seems to have been able to read mathematical French, German, and Italian fluently, because none of these works are ever translated into English. And he quotes them and he discusses their ideas. And Russell was pretty much the same. And of course, I worked for years closely with Joseph Needham, as you know, and he knew 13 languages, and he could read all those things. And he was fluent. He knew Greek, he knew Hebrew, he knew Latin. There wasn't anything he didn't know. He even gave a speech once in Polish, he told me, without knowing Polish, but he memorized it. He liked to tell that story. But the thing is that there are no scholars today or mathematicians capable of reading in these other languages. So it's all sealed off from them. They can't sit down and read what Felix Klein said. They can find the odd quote. And so I'm trying to remedy this. So I'm getting all the Felix Klein writings on non-Euclidean geometry translated. And then I'm working with the translator and a mathematical advisor about certain words that are mid-19th century German mathematical words, which nobody knows exactly how to express them in English. So there's a lot of choice of words going on. But that's one of the projects. And also we've just, we're going to start publishing sacred geometry books. Well, we've got both Mathlogika's books translated, We've just translated a book by Lucy Wolfer Sulzer, who was a disciple of J. Hambidge and Gika. You probably know Hambidge's
Yeah.
works, the other J.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be publishing the works by Naber, who wrote in Dutch. I'm getting a book on sacred geometry by Naber translated at the moment. And in order to try to get this material accessible, this is fundamental classic material, and it's all closed off from everybody because there's nobody alive today who can read all those languages anymore.
That's right.
Because they have not been educated in that way, because education's gone way down. It's dumbed down to the point where it's almost zero. It's no longer really worthwhile going to a university.
No.
Because you come out after 4 years knowing how to choose your pronouns. That's it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you can't.
no, that's not true. You get to learn how to take drugs. You get to learn how to use condoms. There's a lot of stuff you can learn in the university.
You know, I must tell you a funny story. I had a lot of trouble when I was an undergraduate at Penn because I was taking all this postgraduate stuff as an undergraduate and befriending all the professors and becoming the sole student. For instance, I was the sole student of Sanskrit on the campus. And so Sam Kramer wanted me to be his sole student in Sumerian mythology. And there was an archaeologist who wanted me to be the sole student of Andean archaeology, and we were going to go on an expedition to Tiahuanaco together, and all this. And this is me, because I went to university at the age of 16. So by the time I was 18, I was deep into all this, and I was summoned to the Dean of Men, as he was called, who was furious with me. And I had to sit down in a chair opposite him behind his desk and be interrogated. And he said, "I understand that you are trying to use this university for your own purposes." I was completely flabbergasted. I said, "What do you mean exactly?" Or something to that effect. And he said, he read off the list of all the things I was studying: Polish Romantic literature, Mesoamerican archaeology, ancient Greek history, Chinese literature, Chinese philosophy, Indian studies, Persian studies, Plato, all this stuff that was, you know, I had created my own multiverse curriculum. He was absolutely incensed. And he was trying to find an excuse to expel me from the university because I was learning too much.
And it wasn't going anywhere. I mean, you couldn't really apply any of that to a job somewhere. Not really.
Well, so what he did was he canceled a lot of my plans. He wouldn't let me study with Kramer. He wouldn't let me do Tiahuanaco. And so I was very careful with my words and sort of handled him because he was bonkers, really. I was able to stay at the university and cut back on my wild behavior because he couldn't just find the evidence to get rid of me.
Right.
But I've always had that problem.
Yeah.
And anybody going to an institution of learning today would find that it's not an institution of learning. It's an institution of programming.
Yeah. Indoctrination.
Yes.
Of course, you later became, you were Arthur Young, right? You were one of his proteges, or I guess?
Yes, I met Arthur when I was 16 and first got to university through a mutual
guy.
Yes, my best friend at university's father had worked with Arthur on the helicopter.
Right.
And that's how because Arthur lived in Philadelphia, I was at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and so was my friend. And so I got to know Arthur very well, and I worked with him in my spare time. I spent more time working with Arthur than studying, and the silly things you have to study in your first 2 years as an undergraduate is almost worthless. And so I was studying all this stuff with Arthur and helping him write his books, The Geometry of Meaning and the Reflexive Universe.
Wow.
in fact, I used to go around and spend hours and hours, and we go over everything today. He he treated me like a colleague, even though I was only 16, 17, because he was indifferent to age, as indeed I am. You know, I talk to children with great respect who are 6 years old to find out what they think about things.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, they have insights that we don't have.
That's right. Yeah, you treat
So-
everybody like an adult.
Yeah, yeah. So I learned a lot in that way. And
So that's incredible. And then you also, you knew Arthur C. Clarke, didn't you?
yes, I got to know Arthur from 1966 onwards. And my wife Olivia and I knew Arthur and his brother Fred and even their mother very well.
Right.
And so we knew him extremely well from 66 until his death. And I even wrote 2 screenplays with Arthur, neither of which was filmed, because 2001, which I spent 2 years watching it being made, you know.
Yes, I do. You worked, you met Stanley, right?
Oh my God, Stanley Kubrick.
Was
Yes,
he, let's see, I remember you telling me that he was obsessed with Nazi regalia or something.
Oh, you remember that? Yes,
I
he
did.
collected
Oh
Nazi
yeah,
daggers.
I'm a huge Stanley Kubrick fan.
Well, I think I saw something of yours, didn't I, about the moon?
Yeah,
You made a film, yeah.
yeah.
You have on a DVD.
Yeah.
And you know, Tony Freeman is still around. He was the what you'd call the gopher for Stanley.
Right. I know him. I met him.
Yeah, he and I got back in touch again recently, but because he said he'd read all my books. I didn't know that because we've been out of touch for decades, and we were put in touch by a mutual friend suddenly and unexpectedly, and of course Birkin is still alive.
Yep.
He's Jane's brother, and I haven't been in touch with him for some time, but we knew each other pretty well too. I suppose we ought to have a gathering of people. I was very friendly with Harry Lang and Fred Ordway, you know.
Oh yeah. Who helped Stanley on 2001.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, Fred Ordway, when I was in Washington years later, he was so friendly. He took me to the Cosmos Club. And he said, I want to make you a member of the Cosmos Club, but you must spend time in Washington. And a lot of those people in the space world were very friendly to me. And I had good friends at NASA then, and in the Department of Energy, Fred Kumanoff, who was the head of the Solar Power Sunlight program.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys. And of course, my great friend, Jerry O'Neill.
Yeah.
And the Space Studies Institute. Jerry died of leukemia much too young, as
Way
you
too
know.
young.
And so his work was to a large extent lost.
Yeah.
And I got
He wanted to
involved.
build the giant platforms out in space.
He
right?
wanted to have a space colony at L5.
Yeah.
You were probably a member of the L5 Society like I was.
Oh yeah. Been there many times. Look,
You
so you were there. You knew Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick when they're in the middle of making 2001.
Yes, I spent 2 years watching it being made.
Did you?
I took my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, Olivia, out to the set one day to the studio. It was MGM Studios, which I knew well from before. And she was the first woman on the moon, because I knew it had a lot of plaster involved in the surface of the moon. And Ken, the plasterer, was a great friend of mine. And so we went out there, and in that particular soundstage where the lunar surface was, Ken was there making a patch on it or something. And I was able to persuade him to, I said, look, I don't want to walk on the moon, but I want Olivia to walk on the moon so that she can be the first woman on the moon. And she was much lighter than me. And I talked him into it. He said, but it's absolutely forbidden. And I said, look, Ken, nobody's coming in here. The soundstage is deserted. You know what Stanley's like. He's got all those signs up. Nobody can get in. To the whole studio was sealed. I was the only one who could get in. That's another story. And so he let her do it. And so Olivia was the first woman on the moon. But alas, I have no photographs of this event. It's a great shame. Olivia wishes we had some pictures of it, but it's true. I'm married to the first woman on the moon.
Yeah, she's a lovely person too, by the way. So that's incredible. So you told me that he was Stanley into like Nazi science, German World War II science?
Well, we never discussed that. I didn't know about it at that time,
right?
Because we're talking about the 60s.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about Nazi science, Right. It wasn't so well known then. No. Even though I was friendly with all these Nazi scientists, because Harry Lang and Fred Orwell, they were Nazi scientists, for God's sake. And the guys at NASA, they were all Nazi scientists. They were. And they were Arthur's friends. And in fact, strangely enough, Arthur Young was connected with that too, because he was a helicopter.
Yes, he was.
And it was Dornberger who was his boss.
Absolutely.
Lieutenant General Dornberger.
That's right.
So, I mean, you can't win. There's Nazis everywhere.
And don't forget, Stanley married into a upper rank German family. I mean, his wife, Christiana, and they were all Germans. Yeah.
Do you know? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What was this name? Do you know?
She's the woman at the end of Paths of Glory, singing, the German girl, singing the really sad song to the French soldiers. She's about 22, beautiful. That's Christiana Kubrick, who was a German girl working. That's where they met, was on Paths of Glory. And then they got married soon after that. And then her brother became his producer. I can't remember his name now, but he produced all of the films. And also, dig this crazy one. Her brother-in-law was Lena, what's her name? Lena Wertmüller?
Leni Riefenstahl?
Leni Riefenstahl's cinematographer. Stanley knew Leni Riefenstahl's cinematographer. Who was great, by the way.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, Leni Riefenstahl and her cinematographer, whose name I don't know, they were geniuses. Unfortunately, they were working for the wrong side, but you can't see a more stunning film than Triumph des Willens.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's unbelievable. And of course, cast of millions.
Yeah. Incredible films. And Stanley, was, so, he was hanging out with Arthur C. Clarke and was meeting all of these guys from NASA. And then he asked Fred Ordway, who was working on the Apollo missions, to come to London and work on 2001 to get it scientifically correct. And I mean, there's never been a movie where an organization like NASA and all the aerospace companies that worked with Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, I mean, it was really an amazing moment in cinema history, for sure.
It was just by complete coincidence that because I spent the summer of 1963 in England, that I spent it at that same studio, apprenticing under a film director called Carol Rice, to learn the film business. And having spent the whole summer at the studio, I knew everybody there. I knew the guy at the gate. I knew the head of the union. I knew all the gardeners, the plasterers, the whole staff, which was very enormous because it was the best film studio in England. It was
absolutely.
And so when I went over in '66 again, and of course I moved to England in '66. Before I moved over, I came over earlier that year in the spring of '66 and went straight out to the studio, and everybody said, "Oh, Robert, hello, great to see you again," because I was like their mascot because I was the kid, and everybody in the entire studio knew me. And so they said, "Come on in, but don't let Stanley see you." look at all those signs. You know, they thought he was crazy, which he was.
He was.
I mean, he was insane in a nice way, I guess.
Absolutely.
The thing is, but of course, he was also a genius.
Yep.
And they said, now look, Stanley, he's because his office was in the little building in the front, as I was later to discover, because then I got to know. So Stanley started seeing me. He was totally paranoid, and he had signs everywhere. You know, you will be executed and tortured to death if you dare to come in this premises. This kind of stuff, and so I was the only person who ever penetrated the place, who wasn't hired, and over the course of 2 years, this was, and Stanley would see me in the sound stage, and I'd be there, and he didn't know who I was, of course, and this was, he had to make a decision. Was he going to challenge me and confront me, or was he going to ignore me and pretend that he knew who I was? To save face, he pretended he knew who I was. So then this went on for months, and then finally I decided to go in and see him in his office. So I walked into his office, and you went in and you turned right. His office was down at the end on the right, and I knew his secretary, and Tony worked in there as well. And I walked in and I sat down in the chair on the other side of his desk opposite him, and I started talking to him. He didn't dare ask me who I was, because it would meant a loss of face. So he pretended that we knew each other, and I pretended that we knew each other, and we had a very free conversation. And I said to him, Stanley, there's somebody I really would like for you to meet. He was a bit taken aback by that one. And who's that? He said. And I said, his name is Kevin Brownlow. And he made that film on a shoestring called It Happened Here, which was about the Nazis invading and taking over England. Oh, Stanley said to me, do you know, I've wanted to meet him for a long time, but I had no idea how to contact him because I like that film so much.
Yeah.
I said, don't worry, Stanley, I'll arrange it. So I phoned Kevin, whom I knew, and they met up with each other and got on like a house on fire. I wasn't present because I just wanted them to mate, as it were, and it bore fruit because Stanley ended up getting enough money for Kevin to make his next film, which was about the English Civil War period, and which I had also been trying to help Kevin do. Well, I wasn't able to be much help, and so but you see, what's so funny is that I walked in and sat down and started talking to Stanley as an old friend, and he talked to me as an old friend, and because he simply could not bear to admit that anybody had penetrated his defenses, that I got in there. Who was I? And then apparently, according to Tony and the secretary, he later said to him, who is he? After I'd gone, do you know his name?
That's funny.
Oh my God, it was hilarious. Because you see, when you have a paranoid person like Stanley, he either goes completely berserk, or he has to save face and pretend that he's still in control.
Yes. Well, I know you're right, because I talked to someone who worked on his property at St. Albans, and he had a really nice place, I guess. And he would, the guy says that Stanley would wake up at 8 a.m, jump in the golf cart with a shotgun, and drive all around the peripheral of the estate. And one day he said, and then he would do it again at night, like at 5 o'clock, he'd do it again. Finally, one day, he's a gardener or something, and he said, so what are you doing? He goes, I'm making damn sure no one's invading my place here. I was like, wow, that's paranoid.
Yes, well, he genuinely was. But I mean, that's a pretty good story. I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah,
I suppose if Tony Fruin and I ever get together, which we should do, and start talking about old times.
you should. I'd love to be there
I
with the camera.
yes. Well, Tony and I are probably the only two people left who know quite a lot of things.
Yeah,
And because I mean, he was working there every day.
yeah.
Well, I won't even tell you some of the things because some of them are quite embarrassing and very personal things about Kubrick. But actually, you mentioned his wife, who used to call herself Christiana Katerina
Yeah.
when she had her exhibitions as a painter, and she was employed on the film for a while.
Yeah.
Um, I was Ken the plasterer, who was my great mate, took me to her studio. She had a studio on the set at NGM, and what she was doing was she was making plaster aliens, statues of them, and so the idea was that they would be melted and melt down, and then filmed being melted down, and then the film would be reversed, and they would appear to have grown up spontaneously. That these would be aliens who had sort of grown out of nothing
Wow.
in front of the camera. And they spent a lot of money and a lot of time and many months trying to make that work, and they couldn't.
They could do.
And so, by the time he showed it to me, I saw the aliens sitting. The whole room was full of alien statues that she'd made, and she'd stopped. She'd had to stop because it wasn't technically working out.
Yeah.
And Wally Beavers and all his team, because he was the head of special effects, they couldn't pull it off to make it look convincing.
Thank you for that, because I've heard that he did spend a lot of money and time trying to create a believable alien, that he finally had to dump the idea, which he did. And that's that's a great piece of history right there.
And the original monolith was not black; it was transparent.
Yes.
It was a huge piece of plastic, and the largest ever made. And the cinematographer couldn't get it to work because Stanley wanted the visions to appear in it.
Right.
So that
like movies.
The caveman would see images
right
appearing in this transparent monolith. He didn't want it to be black, where you couldn't have images. But that they tried, and they spent. I remember being told the price of the monolith. It was £26,000, which was a lot of money in 1965. Or 64, whenever it was he first made it.
A lot of money.
And they had trouble transporting it to the studio and erecting it and all of that because it was huge. And I would say 20 feet high, something like that. Wow. And there again, the technology failed. So he had to abandon it, much against his will. And then they went for the black monolith, which was, you couldn't have images in it. He was really disappointed about that.
Yeah, I bet he was.
But the plastic
he wanted projected on there would have worked out better.
The plastic one was stuck up in the corner of the soundstage, the same soundstage that had the lunar surface in it, always for years, until the whole production ended, and then I guess it was destroyed, and or something happened to it, or melted down, or whatever. But it was always there, standing there. But of course, nobody knew because nobody was allowed in who wasn't on the production. I was the only outsider, and Olivia at that one time.
That was actually kind of unusual at the time. Hollywood wasn't really known for, super secret closed sets at that time. So that was kind of a new thing, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, nobody had ever heard of such a thing before. And everybody attributed it to Stanley being paranoid, but there was more to it than that. You okay?
Yeah, fine.
There was more to it than that, because I think they didn't want anybody in there because they were doing their thing and they didn't want prying eyes.
Yep.
Um, the the strange thing, of course, the people who were most under wraps were Fred Ordway and all those guys who weren't film people. Wally Vivers was perfectly accessible because he was in the film business.
Right.
But Fred and Harry Lang and those ones, they were not film people. They were the scientific rocket experts and all of that. And you know, Fred wrote a very good book about extraterrestrial life too. Now they were, you would think that they would be annoyed that an outsider had gone in and was befriending them and talking to them, and but they were delighted. The fact is that they were starved of company
Right.
because they were being kept under wraps. And you know, I was an intelligent young person who was able to grasp what was going on and ask sensible questions and discuss things intelligently. I wasn't a Dumbo. And you know, for them, this was a great development because somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
And you know, young people are often adopted as mascots, and I sort of became the mascot of the rocket scientists.
Wow. That is incredible. That is a serious piece of history right there for people who are Stanley Kubrick fans. You know,
Yeah.
that is just really serious. And I always thought that he was really trying to make childhood's end, you know, in a different way because he couldn't afford the massive special effects that would have been needed. So he was kind of doing like a modified childhood's end, which, you know, this great Gnostic drama about, you know, the
Yes.
human race turning into plasma at the end, right? And very interesting. Well, listen, Robert, I kept you a long time, a lot longer than I intended to, but man, we started going into the 2001 stuff. It's like, holy smokes, you should write a book on that. That is like, I mean, you were right there with Fred Ordway and Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, and greatest science fiction film ever made, still to this day.
That's certainly true, and I don't think it will ever be surpassed
No.
for its profundity.
Yeah, it's amazing that he was allowed to make it, to be honest with you. It really was. Especially people who know the cinema world of 1960s. It was not experimental, trust me. It was very, very corporate.
Well, there's no way anybody will ever know the total true cost of the production because Stanley took over the whole studio for years. And, you know, why did MGM allow that? Kirk Kerkorian.
Well, that's very interesting because there's an interview with the president at the time of MGM. And in the interview, he's asked, what do you think about this science fiction movie that's being made over in England that you're paying for? And he says, I swear to God, he says, I'm not really paying much attention to it. You're like, wait, your most expensive movie that you're making this year, and you're not spending much time thinking about it? It's
He
just,
really said that?
yep. It was very nonchalant about the whole thing.
Well, he wasn't paying for it then.
As a person who's worked in the industry, man, they're counting every penny. Trust me.
He must not have been paying for it. Nobody could figure out how MGM could ever afford it because
Exactly
we're talking
right.
such gigantic sums to take over the whole studio for years. The best,
yeah, there's no way.
In England, and then the studio was demolished afterwards.
You got it. And if you watch the original credits of 2001, which are gone now, there is at least 4 minutes of thanking McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed. I mean, every aerospace gigantic company is being thanked on this. And now those are gone. Those credits are missing now, but they were originally, because I remember going, wow.
I remember.
15, I think, when 2001 came out. And I remember thinking, all these companies are helping this guy. Remember?
Even Parker Pens. Parker Pens designed the pen of the future.
So the production designer, whose name I'm going to forget, was Robert not Abel. I can't remember the name of the production designer. He wrote a book about doing the production work for Kubrick. And in the book, he says when he arrived at the studio to begin production work, Kubrick pulled out all the models, the Discovery model, the model for the moon base, the model for the bus that takes it to the moon. He said that was all done. It was all finished. Everything was done long before I arrived. Adams, Robert Adams is his name. I think that's his name. And he says that it was all done. He says, I don't know who did it. I never asked. I said, here it is, and so he didn't even, he worked on other things, interiors and things. But for the most part, he said that most of the technical stuff had already been figured out long before he arrived. So I don't know. I don't know if that was Fred Ordway or what, but
Well, Harry Lang did a lot of that.
probably could be Harry Lang, probably. Interesting. All right, Robert, you have given me an hour and a half of your very valuable time. I can't wait to read your book. I'd like to have you back to talk more about this.
Anytime, Jay.
Been a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
All right, everybody, I am Jay Weidner, and this is Reality Check, where we try to bring esoteric knowledge into reality for you. And please hit like and subscribe. Get me over 30,000 subs. And thank you for watching. And I will be back next week with another show, I hope. Okay, thank you.